Okay, Shahryar, you can start now.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm Mohammad Shahryar Talabdar, Associate Professor, Department of English at Shantamarji. On behalf of Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association, I welcome you all in today's webinar series titled Metacognition in Action, Applying Metacognitive Strategies to English Language Learning and Teaching. Dear participants, we are much delighted to see the gracious presence of Kelly Reister, English Language Fellow, U.S. Department of State, United States of America. Kelly Reister is our today's workshop facilitator. We also recognize the kind presence of Ms. Rubaya Tasmia, English Language Program Coordinator, American Center, U.S. Embassy, Dhaka. We further acknowledge the gracious attendance of Dr. Muhammad Mohibullah, the President of Global Aid for Sustainable Development and General Secretary of BELTA, as well as Professor Ahmed Bashir from the English Department at Dhaka University and the President of Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association, BELTA. Numerous academicians, educators, and students from various institutions across the nation have joined us online. Now, I'd like to have the honor of asking Professor Ahmed Bashir, President of BELTA, to give his welcome speech and introduce our today's webinar facilitator. Professor Bashir, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Shahryar. So, dear distinguished facilitator of today's webinar, Kelly Reister, dear General Secretary BELTA, Dr. Mohammad Mohibullah, BELTA office bearers, BELTA Executive Committee members, Ms. Ruwayat Tasmia from U.S. Embassy Dhaka, dear participants, good evening. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me to welcome you all as the President of BELTA to the webinar today. This is the 31st webinar organized by BELTA. As you know, that BELTA is the largest teacher association, English language teachers association in Bangladesh. It has been organizing various programs, including international conference, national conference, webinars, other teacher development programs. So webinar is one of the flagship programs which we have started organizing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, we have reached the 31st. We have organized 30 webinars earlier, and this is going to be the 31st webinar. And today's topic, as you have heard, is a very important topic, metacognition in action, applying metacognitive strategies to English language learning and teaching. This is very important because we all think, but we do not know how to think. So metacognition is thinking about thinking, right? So I believe that today's session we'll learn various metacognitive strategies which will benefit the teachers who are participating today, as well as I see some of the students who are participating. So I hope that this webinar, this session is going to be a highly rewarding experience for all of us. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce our distinguished facilitator today. Ms. Kelly Reister, you already have heard that Kelly Reister is an English language fellow with the U.S. Department of State. Before coming to Bangladesh, she taught contextualized medical English to health sciences students in her home state of North Carolina, USA, as well as Introduction to English Linguistics online for international students. She was also a virtual English language fellow, U.S. State Department for students in Belarus. She has experience of teaching business English and ESL for adult learners and English tutoring for young children. Kelly has a BA in linguistics and an MA in TESOL. She's widely experienced in this field. And ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ms. Kelly Reister. Over to you, Kelly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Right, I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. It is telling me that only the host can share the screen. So I'm not sure who needs to give me permission to share my screen.
You are co-host. Let me check again.
Okay, well, let me try it then. Let me see if it will work now, because I did it earlier.
Yeah. As co-host, you're supposed to be able to share the screen. Yeah, it's working.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, and let me get up here. Oh, sorry, can't see. Screen sharing, excellent. Sorry, just trying to blow this up and I need to be able to see. There we go, slideshow. Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Okay. So as was mentioned before, my topic for tonight is metacognition in action. Let's see, it's not moving forward. Let me see what's going on with my screen. Here we go. There we go. So we're going to talk about applying metacognitive strategies to English language learning and teaching. So I do want to address both of those. And Professor Bashir just gave a great introduction, so I don't need to spend very much time on my personal introduction. But as he said, I have had some experience teaching English, and I am currently teaching at Premier University here in Chittagong, and I'm teaching English language skills development as well as TESOL methodology here at Premier University for the MA TESOL students. Just a little bit of personal information about me and who I am. I am a teacher, but I'm also a mom and a grandmother and a wife. So this picture that you see is a recent picture of our family on a WhatsApp call with my husband and my 5 daughters. And the daughter with the long dark hair at the bottom is a mother as well, and she has 2 daughters. And so we are keeping the tradition of only girls alive in our family. Other things, I enjoy dancing, music, and medicinal herbs. My time here in Bangladesh is my first time in Asia and first time in Bangladesh. And I want you to know how much I love the people here and how much I have enjoyed my time here so far. The only thing I don't really like about Bangladesh is trying to cross a street or riding in a car. I find that a little bit intimidating and scary. All right. So I would like to know a little bit about you. And I understand that we have some students here and some teachers here. But because this webinar is specifically focused on language teaching, what I would like to know from you is how many languages we have that are spoken here today. So if you could please, in the chat, and I'll pull my chat up so I can see it, I would like to see in the chat the different languages that we have, so we can kind of do a count of how many different languages are spoken here. This will give me an idea of kind of your experience with language learning and where you're coming from. So if you could just type into the chat languages that you speak. Obviously, we've got Bangla, and obviously we have English, and I see someone has just put that. Excellent. So I know that we have at least those 2 languages. I am in Chittagong, so we have Chittagonian down here. A lot of people will speak Chittagonian. Okay, there I see someone has responded with that one as well. And I know many people here in Bangladesh learn Hindi. So I've already got that one as well. Okay, very good. We've got another Chittagonian down there. Okay, very good. Any other languages that you all speak? Anyone speak Hindi or French or anything else? Okay. Great. I'm seeing some Hindi, English, Bangla. Perfect. Very good. I've got a little bit of French. I've got some Hindi and a little Arabic. Very good. So I've got someone who's still learning some languages. I love it. Okay, and I will add two. So, okay, very good. So I'm going to say we've got Bangla, English, French, Hindi, a little Arabic. I think we've got all 5 of those. We've got Chittagonian, and we've got someone with Urdu. Very good. And I'm going to add in, I speak Spanish, which is not very useful here in Asia, so probably none of you speak that language. I also speak Dutch from the Netherlands. So we've got 9 languages, and I am learning slowly and painfully Mandarin Chinese. So we've got about 10 different languages here that people are learning and speaking. And I think it's important as language teachers that we are always learning and understanding the process that our students go through. So that's one of the reasons that I asked this question. So thank you for your responses on that. All right, next slide. I want us to start out today with a metacognitive exercise. And so I'm going to ask you all, I don't know if you have maybe a piece of paper you can write on quickly, or you can use your phone, or you can type it in the chat, however you want. But if you would please type, what are your goals for our workshop tonight? What is it that you're hoping to get out of this workshop, or why are you here? And if you're here because you have to be, that's okay too. You can write that down, but just quickly, one sentence of what your goals are and why you are here tonight. This is an excellent exercise that you can do with your students. Even students who are a little bit younger can even think about what they want to learn today or what their goals are for the day. And keeping a journal of what they want to learn can help focus them on what they are learning and kind of understanding where they are. So I see we've got a comment in the chat about it. Great, excellent. So hopefully you had a chance to write that down. I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next slide. And we're going to get into cognition versus metacognition. This is what I call the meat and potatoes, right? This is kind of what we are addressing with our webinar tonight. Okay, great. Got some more comments. Excellent. So first of all, let's define cognition so that we can talk about what metacognition is. All right, so cognition is the process of acquiring knowledge through information in the environment using the 5 senses. So in other words, whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, we're going to internalize that information, and our brain is going to act according to what we've learned, right? That's cognition. It's what goes into our brain, and it is what we think, right? So that is our cognition, is our thinking. So the prefix meta in English means around, about, or beyond. Therefore, metacognition is the awareness and understanding of what is around our thinking, or in other words, what our thought processes are, and being aware of those processes. So I want to share a story with you. And remember, I showed you the picture earlier of my daughter, and I told you she had 2 children. So here is a picture of that daughter with her 2 children. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you is because you'll notice that the older daughter has a bandage on her hand. And this is a story that will help me to illustrate cognition and metacognition. So this small child was in the kitchen with her father, and they got too close to the stove, and she took her hand and placed it flat onto the very hot kitchen burner, and she burned her hand very badly, and she had to go to the hospital and get the doctors to put burn medicine on it, and she had to go back for many weeks to heal. She's 2 years old. It's all healed. You cannot even tell that she was burned, so we're happy about that. So what did she learn? What was her cognitive experience? Well, she learned that stoves are hot, or they can be hot. She learned that if you touch a hot stove, it hurts. She learned that when you burn your hand, you get blisters and it turns very red. She learned that doctors can be very helpful in situations where you're hurt. And she learned that after your whole family spends many hours in the emergency room, mommy takes you out for milkshakes. So that's her cognition. She begins to understand the world better, and she has learned many things. Now, what is metacognition? Metacognition is probably something her mother is going to help her with at this point. Explicit questions that help her understand what she learned. So Charity learned touching the stove is hot and it will burn you. Her mother can ask this question: Charity, are you going to put your hand on that hot stove again? And Charity is going to think about what she learned and answer, no, I'm not. So the difference between the cognition and the metacognition: the cognition, we're learning about what's in our environment, and the metacognition, we're taking an extra step to analyze what we learned, what our brain took in through our 5 senses. So, as was said earlier by Professor Bashir, metacognition is thinking about thinking. In other words, why do I think this? What does that mean? And how will I think differently in the future? And the metacognition cycle, you can find this, I found this graphic online. There are lots of different graphics for this. It's very simple, but it's really profound and important as we incorporate this into our teaching and our learning. So we plan, we monitor, we think about what we did, we evaluate, how did it work? What went well, what didn't go well? And then we plan again according to the evaluation, right? And in the middle, you'll notice that word reflection. We're going to come back to that word a little bit later, but that's all part of this process of metacognition. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So we are language teachers. So now that we've established what metacognition is, in the broader scope of things, let's apply it specifically to language learning and teaching. And in that vein, we're going to talk about some metacognitive strategies, meaning strategies that oversee, direct, and regulate the language learning process. So we're going to focus on that. My hope is that tonight you'll go away with a few ideas of how you can implement this in your own classes. And Mohib, I had planned to set a timer for myself, but I completely forgot to do so. So you're welcome to give me warnings when I need to kind of start wrapping things up. But okay, so so let's look first of all at a few metacognitive strategies. And I'm taking this from Rebecca Oxford's Language Learning Strategies, What Every Teacher Should Know. So we have kind of 3 different categories here for these strategies. The first one, called Centering Your Learning, is going to be where we begin to pay attention to what we're doing. We notice details and we begin to hear errors, and we begin to associate ourselves with what we want to become or what we should become and where we are, right? So we kind of see ourselves in the learning process where we are and where we can be. For the middle one, we have arranging and planning your learning. So in this particular strategy, this is where we do specific things to think about our goals. What do I want to accomplish? How do I do that? How am I going to approach my learning? Or how am I going to approach this one specific task that I've been given in class? Or what are things that I can do outside of my classroom? And lastly, we have the category of evaluating your learning. And again, that's going to be you deciding. And a good example of this would be, since I've been here in Bangladesh, I've tried to learn just a few survival phrases to be able to talk to my CNG and rickshaw drivers to go where I want to go. And when the rickshaw driver looks at me with his eyebrows like this, I know that I have not been successful in communication. And when he says, ha, 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 and motions me to get into the rickshaw, I was successful. So that's one small form of self-monitoring. Okay, so what does this look like from a student's point of view? What do these metacognitive strategies look like? So let's take a look really quickly. I told you we would come back to the word reflection. So reflection is another way that they've stated it on this slide is self-diagnosis. And I think it's important to be aware of the way that we approach learning. Now, I'm giving this from the student's point of view for learning a language. However, as teachers of English, it is often our job not only to teach English, but also to teach our students how to learn. So it's really important that we are aware of the strategies that students need so that we can help teach them those strategies. So we have a few. I'd like to go through these. We won't take too much time. Awareness of how we're learning the target language, right? Are there things that we can be better at? What are things that we can improve on? I've had conversations with my students here and fussed at them about speaking Banglish in my class. And I've told them it is very easy here to switch to Bangla because everyone speaks it. But if you want to improve your English, during my 1.5 hour class, I would appreciate it if you would try to speak only in English so that you can improve, right? And so that's bringing some awareness to the students. Obviously, they need to develop problem-solving skills. How do we do that? Some things that I have helped my students to be aware of is synonyms, right? Because we know that many times our students can't come up with the word that they need or the correct word. And so I teach them to walk in circles around the word by using synonyms. And so we will often give synonyms for different words so that when they come to a problem, they realize, hey, I might have a few synonyms that I can use to solve this particular language problem. Experimenting with familiar and unfamiliar learning strategies. That's definitely something that we as teachers can help our students by challenging them in class and giving them new activities that they might not have done before. We can teach our students decision making about how to approach a task. Kind of as I mentioned with the walking in a circle around a word, that's a strategy that they can use. They can make a decision to move forward even though they're not 100% sure of how to say something. Again, we can teach them self-evaluation. I'm going to give you an example of that in just a minute. Transferring strategies. So if a student is really great in science or math or some other subject, can we help them to transfer that learning skill into their English learning? We can also help our students to become more independent, autonomous, and lifelong learners. So for example, can we encourage our students to grab their phones and start working on English on Duolingo, even though they're taking an English class? Can they do things outside of the class that are going to help them to continue with their learning process? I don't think I'm going to spend much time on this. I don't want to take up all of our time with it, but again, plan and organize your learning, monitor the problems, evaluate how you did, and manage your learning. So right now, what I'd like to do, we talked at the beginning about the different languages that you all speak in here. And maybe some of you are currently learning a language. Maybe you are not, but maybe you still have a language that is your second language, right? Most of you will. And even if you speak it really well, there's always room for improvement. So I'd like for you to take just a minute to scribble down on a piece of paper somewhere a self-diagnosis. So I want you to think about each category listed here: grammar, listening, speaking, writing, reading, vocabulary, pronunciation. And I want you to give yourself a score on how well you do that in your second language. So I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds and just let you write that down. Okay, that probably wasn't quite enough time for you to think about it, but in the interest of finishing our webinar on time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But I hope that helped you to kind of think about where your learning is in your language. Maybe English is your second language and you are a great speaker. Maybe you are brilliant, but maybe there's something you still want to work on for that particular language. And it can give you an idea by doing a self-diagnosis of where you are. So as teachers, we can help our students to self-diagnose by giving them quizzes like this. So self-diagnosis is not something that our students might come up with on their own, but it's still part of the student process of learning strategies, metacognitive strategies. And so by giving them quizzes like this, we can help them to think about where they are and where they want to be. And I'm just going to quickly give you, I told you that I had been working on Mandarin Chinese, and you can see my scores here are not very good because I have not been working very hard. So I've given myself some pretty bad scores, especially in grammar. But it also shows me that I have pretty good listening skills because I like to listen to Chinese dramas. So my listening is getting much better. All right, so that's just a way that we can approach the language learning process for our students. As part of my own English skills development class here at Premier University, I gave them an assignment halfway through the semester to consider their English development. And you can see here that I asked them to think about it. They're not being graded on this assignment, but they were required to turn it in to me. And they had to respond to things such as, this week I learned, this week I spoke English with these people. My strong points are, my difficulties are, I would like help with, my learning and practicing plans for next week are. So it's very possible that students never thought about who they spoke English with outside of my class until I asked the question. It was just a fact of life. There were certain people they spoke English with occasionally. And so this gave them the opportunity to really stop and think about that, and to think about where they are, what their goals are for learning English in my class. So again, this is the student taking the opportunity to think about it, but as a teacher, I'm providing them the opportunity by giving them those questions. Another thing that I think is really important for our students in the language learning process that we as instructors can help them understand is that there are learning curves and plateaus, especially in language learning. So at the beginning, the progress is really fast. But then when they get to about the intermediate level, there is a plateau because you can survive in the language without really doing much more. And it takes a lot of work to get to that advanced level, and that progress can feel slow. So again, most of the students here in Bangladesh at my university have been taking English since they were 5 to 10 years old. So most of them have good enough English to survive. And so it's my job as a teacher to teach them that, hey, you can become better, you can increase in your learning, and there are plateaus. Maybe you've hit a plateau and it's time for you to up your game. Okay, I'm going to give you another strategy here to kind of think about your learning. I'm going to give you a poem to read, and then I want you to think about what it means. And I'm going to read it aloud for you so that you can hear it. And then I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. And I want you to take just a minute or two to talk with someone in a breakout room about the poem and what it means, okay? All right, so here we go. Here's the poem. I want you to be able to describe in one sentence what's happening in this poem. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird and shun the frumious bandersnatch. Oh, I think I'm reading a second. I just read that part, sorry. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought. So I apologize, there's a bit of an overlap there. But that is the poem. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, and I'm going to try to put you in breakout rooms. And again, just a couple of minutes to talk about it, probably only 1 minute because of time. And let's see if we can have some discussion. All right, we've got between 2 and 3 people in each room. So that should be good. Go ahead and try it in one sentence to describe that poem. So you could go to your breakout rooms now. Is everyone able to join their breakout room? There are some who have not gone to a breakout room. Does anyone need to be sent to a different room? Let's see. Move to room 1. Make sure everybody's got someone in their room. Those of you who are still in this session, if you click on the icon, you should be able to go to your breakout room. It's sometimes more difficult if you're on a telephone, but you can try. Okay, I see that in some rooms there's not a lot of conversation happening, so I'll go ahead and bring everybody back. All right, I think we've got just a few more seconds and we'll have everybody back with us. Okay. Says we've got about 10 more seconds, but I think we have a couple more people who are not back yet. Okay. So I think we have everybody back now. If you're not familiar with this particular poem, this is by Lewis Carroll, and it was a poem that was written using words that are not real words, but phonetically they sound like they could be English words just because they follow phonetic rules in English. And so when I asked you to read a poem, you probably were not expecting a poem that had words that were made up. So again, how did you plan what you were going to write about this poem? Did that change when you saw the language? Not write, but I asked you to speak about it. Did it change when you saw the language of the poem? Have you come across poetry like this before? How effective do you think your summary was, and how motivated were you to complete the task? All of these questions that I have posed here are not necessarily about the poem. I'm not teaching literature. I'm teaching the students to think about their thinking. So they're thinking about what they were doing as they prepared for this assignment. They were thinking about how they approached this assignment. They were making connections between, have they done things like this before, and how did they do that elsewhere? And they were making connections between, was I successful at what I wanted to do and what the original assignment asked of me? And then even motivation, we're talking about motivation. Were you motivated to complete that task because it was a difficult one or because it was fun, right? That's one of my favorite poems. So I think that's a fun one. That's why I wanted to include that. All right, so let's move on and talk about what it looks like more from the teacher point of view when we're talking about metacognitive strategies. Okay, so sorry, did it go? I think it jumped ahead. All right, I'm gonna have to, okay, there's my title. So one of my very favorite methods of metacognitive teaching is using the Socratic method. And kind of what I just did with the Jabberwocky poem, where I asked many questions about it to kind of help students focus on their thinking and some of the strategies that we've talked about. That's exactly what the Socratic method is. Some things to remember as a teacher when using the Socratic method. First of all, why tell your students, why teach your students when you can ask and generate those thoughts, kind of get their schema flowing in their brains. Another thing to remember with this method is to be patient. Students take time to adjust, especially if they've been in an environment where they have, yes, okay, especially if they've been in an environment where they've been used to, sorry, trying to get my slide right here. If they've been in an environment where they're used to, having someone tell them what to do. Okay, so encourage your students in that discomfort and begin, continue to ask more questions. The more questions you ask, the better the students will be able to understand. I hope you all are seeing my screen again. The screen that are you seeing it?
No.
You can't see my screen?
We see the first.
Oh, you could only see the first one. Okay, let's try that again. Do not want you to miss the screen. Let's go from, let me just go from the beginning and I'll go through this again. Oh, it's not allowing me. Let me try this. Close all. Let's try it again.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, so now it's taking me back to the beginning. Let me just fly through these quickly and get to where we are. Are you getting a review? Okay, so talking about Socrates, right? So we just talked about the Socratic method, and that is kind of what I went over there. Just be patient with your students and ask questions. I'm giving you a QR code here, and you're welcome to take a picture with your phone and link to that particular website. This is a website that has some metacognitive strategy ideas for teaching. You're welcome to go there and look at those. The Jumpstart Journal that we did at the beginning of this workshop is one of those ideas. There's a pass the ball game. So you just take a piece of paper, ball it up, you throw it to a student and ask a question. Then that student throws it to another student and you ask that student a question. And some of the questions that you can ask anything, but here are a few ideas. What stands out to me? What makes me wonder about this topic? Or which parts or terms are new to you? And which ones do you recognize? And how do I connect this with what I already know? So just a few questions here that you can ask your students. But I found this website to have some good ideas to kind of get you started thinking about how you can apply metacognitive strategies in your classroom. One that you've probably heard very often, it's kind of a buzzword in academia and in TESOL right now, is think, pair, share. In other words, you give the students something to think about on their own first, maybe a worksheet or a question or a journal entry or something. And once they've had time individually to think about that, you pair them together with another student. So they have a partner and they have something that they need to discuss. Are they going to share their ideas with each other? Are they going to have specific questions to ask each other? So they're pairing with each other and then they're going to share that with the class as a whole. So that's another strategy that's being used in TESOL a lot. That's actually a metacognitive strategy because we're giving students time to think about it, to draw connections, to communicate with other students, rather than the teacher being the one feeding all of the information. Kind of at the end of this, I want to remember that our students deal with many different affective considerations. There's the affective domain in language learning, which is where we talk about things such as personality, self-esteem, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, subject or task anxiety, or general anxiety about all different things. And so it's really important for us as teachers to recognize those things that our students are dealing with and to help them to recognize those as well. That's all part of metacognition, understanding that my personality might affect the way that I learn a language. If I'm a very outgoing person, it's possible that I'm going to learn to speak a little faster than my peers, but it might affect my writing because I don't like to spend time alone working on writing. We can always help our students to understand their personalities with a Myers-Briggs personality test or something to help them see what kind of a learner they are so that they can think about what strategies they can apply to their particular learning. This can even be done with younger children to a certain degree. And I think there was maybe, yes, sociocultural factors. So again, thinking about where our students are in society and how they approach certain tasks based on what they're given. So for example, I have students at my university who attended English medium schools, but I also have students who attended Bangla medium, and the difference in their language is also apparent. And so it's something to take into consideration socially, the opportunities that they've had for learning versus their classmates, and how to pair them with other students so that they can learn better and that they can have an advantage in that particular way. And kind of in closing, I wanted to share, this is kind of a long quote, I apologize, but I wanted to read this to you because I think it's very interesting to kind of think about why metacognition is an important part of language learning. There is evidence that metacognitive strategies play a more significant role than other learning strategies in this process, meaning the language learning process, because once a learner understands how to regulate his or her own learning through the use of strategies, language acquisitions should proceed at a faster rate. Metacognitive knowledge, or knowledge of how one learns best, is seen as particularly important. Strategic learners have metacognitive knowledge about their own thinking and learning approaches, a good understanding of what a task entails, and the ability to implement the strategies that best meet both the task demands and their own learning strengths. So I know that's a mouthful, but I think it's kind of a review of what we've talked about tonight and kind of helping learners to approach their learning journey and the process. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation, and if we have time, I can open it up for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. And you rightly juxtaposed cognitive and metacognitive, or cognition and metacognition, side by side, which really helped us to understand the difference between. And also, you rightly talked about metacognitive strategies and also reflection, which is really needed for the students' autonomy that we have been talking about for quite a long time, that really we want to establish inside the classroom. So thank you for that. Now, we'll have those who are attending online from different parts of the country or maybe from the world. So you can ask questions or we can leave a comment, and we'd like to share it with our today's presenter. Yes. Any question? You can also ask questions in the chat box, or you can leave your comment and question on the WhatsApp, Facebook Live. I can see on
Okay,
WhatsApp, Jim Abu Tahir
can I
said,
ask a question?
excellent topic. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. While people are thinking about their question, let me just
Yes, sir,
ask you.
please
So,
go ahead.
thank you, Kelly, for the wonderful presentation. And you see that in our context, what we feel is that, so our, probably you might know that our mainstream teaching is heavily teacher-centered, in our school system, secondary, higher secondary school students are heavily dependent on them. And as you mentioned, as we all know, that one of the main areas of metacognition, the third one is the evaluation, right? Monitoring and evaluation. And what I find difficult with as I teach at university, who came from the secondary, came through the mainstream education where they're heavily teacher dependent. So in my writing class, when I ask them to give peer feedback, to evaluate their peers' writing, most often I find them, sir, you please evaluate, you give your comments, so I can't give my comments. So that is one of the challenges I face mostly. So what suggestion could you give in this regard? How can we motivate our students to evaluate their own writing, our own work, as well as their peers' work?
That's a great question. And I absolutely know what you're talking about because I tried that this semester as well with some of my students, and it was interesting. And I think when I do it over again this semester, something that I think I'm going to do is to really scaffold that learning. So as I mentioned, we're not just teaching our students English, we're teaching them these strategies and how to think. So in the future, and I will let you know how this goes once I try it. But one thing that I think I'm going to do is scaffold that learning by saying, okay, I would like for you to go through and look for just grammatical errors. So periods, capitals, subject verb agreement. And then the next time I will say, okay, I want you to switch your papers again. And this time I want you to look to see, is there an introduction? Are there main body paragraphs, and is there a good conclusion? And if not, what would you change? So maybe scaffolding that learning a little bit for them so that they can learn, what makes a good paper, but also what a teacher's looking for. And so, that is a problem that I encountered as well. And that's my plan. So in my reflective teaching practice, I've decided that I'm going to scaffold that learning so that when they approach that task again, they're not looking at me saying, I don't know how to do it. There's probably two girls, it's always girls, right? And they know how to do it, and they take over and they mark everybody's paper. But other than that, most of them were a little trepidatious, to say the least, about doing that. So yeah, that would be my advice. Scaffold it.
Right, thank you. Because
uh,
they say that what
Thank
to
you.
check, what to
Thank you.
do, right? They often
Mhm.
come up with that what to do, what to check.
Yes, yes. And one thing I found very helpful here is to give a lot of rubrics. For any assignment that I want done, I create a rubric, and that way the students know exactly what I expect from them and kind of word for word. I found that to be very helpful. And it's also helpful for me as an instructor, because then I'm not just assigning them something and I'm not asking them to do something other than the assignment. You know, sometimes we assign our students to do something and we find that we're actually asking them, like I asked my MA TESOL students to do a lesson plan and to tell me which affective domain issue that they were dealing with in that lesson. Well, I realized when I asked them to do that, that they really didn't have experience writing lesson plans the way that I understood a lesson plan. So I was giving them a double assignment without realizing it. And so I think another part of it is just to make sure that I'm really narrowing the focus of my expectations for my students so they know exactly what I want from them.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Kelly, there is an interesting question from GM Abutahir. He asked the question like this: which metacognitive strategy is mostly helpful to motivate high school level students?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading in the chat. Could you say that question one more time? Because you're giving me one from not from the chat, correct?
Yeah. It's on the Facebook, so that's actually, and it's about his school. It says, which metacognitive strategy is mostly helpful to motivate high school level students?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that depends on the day, the student, the year, lots of factors that play in there. However, I will say I personally am not a huge fan of the onus of motivation to be completely on the instructor. And so I think that giving our students kind of some of these quizzes like I showed you, where the students are writing down what they're working on and how they're going to achieve something, it helps them to think about it. And I think for high school students, it's a great idea to focus them on the future. So if you're asking them, you know, what is your goal for English? What do you hope to do with your English in the next 3 years? Or how do you find, you know, why is this particular subject that we're studying today important in your education? I think it's really important because at that age, they have a limited view of the future. And so I think anything that we can do to help them understand the place of their learning in their overall, how can I say it, in within the context of the next 5 years, right? 5 years, they can see. 5 years down the road, they can do. And so if we can help to put their learning in kind of that context of why is this important today? What does this mean for me in 5 years? I think it's motivational and helpful. Obviously, I'm also a huge fan of games because I'm an American, I guess, but I love games in the classroom. And games are something that we can, as teachers, create, but then once the students begin playing the games, there's a lot of internal, you know, intrinsic motivation to learn that game, especially if there's some kind of candy or some kind of reward at the end of it, right? So we can provide that motivation, that external or extrinsic motivation for our students, but I think it's really important to have them focused on why they're doing what they're doing. And I hope that that helps a little bit with your context and what you're thinking about.
Thank you. Now you can pick one question from the chat that you can see in the chat box. I can see 2 different questions. One is too long. It says, have you found any role of directed attention, person knowledge, problem solving, planning and evaluation, and mental translation in developing metacognition? If yes, which one is dominating and why? It's a huge one.
That is a pretty intense question, and I'm not sure exactly all that's being asked there. And I do think that I think that probably, all of those things play into metacognition. It's just depending on the individual. And I think a lot of that is kind of those affective factors that we were talking about, that different people approach problems differently. And so our job as instructors is to help them understand their own learning process, right? And again, that's where I mentioned the Myers-Briggs personality test. If your students are a little bit older, you can have them take the test and find out what their learning style is, right? Or talk about it specifically, and then have them write about their learning style and what that looks like for them individually. So that's a way that we can kind of focus our students on the metacognition of learning, right? But I would like to address the other question, if that's okay. Teachers follow their lesson plans. Isn't metacognition a feedback of the lesson? So I think what you're asking is, shouldn't metacognition be part of what we're doing in our lessons? I hope I'm understanding that question correctly. But yes, obviously, we want to be very explicit in our lesson planning and the way that we approach our lesson planning to provide students that opportunity. So for example, because I like the Socratic method so much, sometimes my lesson plans will be, I present a little information, and then I just have a list of questions that I ask my students. And I write those questions out very specifically on my paper, and I think about them, and sometimes I go back and I think, oh, that's not a good question, and I'll change it. And I create my lesson plan with those questions in mind to be able to ask the students, to generate the conversation, to get them thinking, to ask effective follow-up questions, right? So absolutely, it should be part of our lesson to include these metacognitive thinking strategies, because as I've mentioned a few times before, we're not just teaching English, we're teaching them how to think about their learning in this process. I hope that was an answer to that question.
Thank you. Jannat Noor Akhtar Begum, she's asking the question, most often teachers follow their lesson plans. Isn't metacognition a feedback of the lesson?
So that's the one that I was just answering. I had looked onto the chat and seen that one. So that was the answer that I was just giving a minute ago.
Okay. So do you like to answer the previous one that was asked by Mr. Azran Azmi? How about that question?
Yes,
chat?
Yes, I did. I did answer that one as well. That's the one where I was saying that we have to be very aware of our learners' kind of development and personalities, and to help them be aware of that as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. We don't see any other questions. There are some beautiful comments. So people from different parts of the country, they're just appreciating your initiative, and also the way you explain the thing, cognition and metacognition. So that's it. So since we don't have any more questions, I think that we can stop our question and answer session here. And now we can move on to the next part of our today's workshop. So, now to deliver a courtesy speech. Can you hear us? Ms. Rumaita Smith, coordinator of the English language program, American Center, US Embassy.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Shahryar Bhai, and thank you, everyone. It was a brilliant session. I enjoyed throughout. Before I kind of share my reflection, I would like to thank BELTA and everyone involved in making this webinar happen. And we always appreciate all the great initiatives BELTA is constantly taking to keep the English Teachers Network of Bangladesh strong and creating opportunities. And thank you so much, Kelly, for this brilliant presentation and for your time. We like the Q&A session and throughout the strategies you shared. I'm sure our participants, they were greatly benefited. And while I was listening to this entire session, and I was kind of thinking that how this whole discussion revolves around a fundamental question, that how often do we encourage our students to reflect on the way they learn? And it's kind of a question as teachers that what approaches do we use, right? So, and as Bashir sir at the very beginning said, metacognition is the process of thinking about thinking. So I think this entire webinar session created a wonderful opportunity for everyone who are here today is kind of take that space and start thinking about their way of teaching, their way of thinking about all other teaching approaches. So this webinar itself was more like a practice session for all the teachers, I believe. That's what I thought. And there's so many things about the metacognitive strategies that Kelly, you have shared, is that it kind of is an approach. It is beyond a tool that we can bring into the classroom. It's more like building a trusting relationship between teachers and students, where they both help each other to create a mindset of intentional learning. So that's what I thought, and it's beautiful. And I don't have like a lengthy closing remark, but I so appreciate for everyone's time, and thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this, and may this commitment to metacognition and metacognitive strategy, and may it kind of help our student to instill a lifelong love for learning in the hearts, and it kind of keeps our teachers, develop their own way of teaching as well. So thank you so much, and with that, I would say that's it from my end.
So maybe Shahriar got disconnected, and
Sorry.
oh yeah, you're
sorry,
here.
I'm back. I'm
He's
actually
back.
sorry for the technical glitch. I was having some problem with my network. Sorry, it has been fixed
No.
now. Okay.
No problem. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like to invite our General Secretary of BELTA, Dr. Mohibullah, to say a few words and also to express a vote of thanks to the audience. Dr. Mohibullah.
Thank you, Shahriar. Good evening, Professor Ahmed Bashir, Honorable President BELTA, Ms. Rubaiyat Tasmia, English Language Program Coordinator, U.S. Embassy Dhaka, Ms. Kelly Royster, English Language Program Fellow, U.S. Department of State, USA, office bearers of BELTA, and all the participants. Good evening once again. So I'm really happy to have the presence of you all, and my heartfelt appreciation goes to Kelly Royster, whose expertise and insights into metacognitive strategies in English language learning and teaching have not only enlightened us, but also equipped us with practical tools to enhance our pedagogical skills. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to President for his great support and guidance, which have been the backbone of this successful event. And special thanks to Ms. Rubaiyat Tasmia, English Language Program Coordinator, U.S. Embassy Dhaka, for being with us on behalf of U.S. Embassy. And we do appreciate and recognize the kind support of the U.S. Embassy Dhaka in the development of English language education in Bangladesh. Especially, we can say that today's facilitator, Ms. Kelly Royster, she is also a gift from U.S. Embassy Dhaka through U.S. Department of State. And our moderator, Mr. Shahriar Talukdar, he deserves a special thanks for flawlessly steering the session and facilitating seamless exchange of knowledge. And I also express my sincere thanks to the office bearers of BELTA and executive members of BELTA and all the participants who have joined us today in this enlightening webinar. And once again, I thank each and everyone for making this webinar a memorable and productive experience. And we look forward to your participation in our future webinars. As our Honorable President has mentioned at the beginning, we have been organizing these kinds of webinars since the time of COVID-19, and it is the 31st webinar series. We have webinar in February and also in the next months. So we'd like to invite you all to join in our future webinars as well. Thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your leadership and inspiration. And this brings to a close. Dr. Bashir, Professor Bashir, sir, do you want to say anything?
No, nothing. Just thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and thank you so much for your presence this evening, and hope to see you soon, inshallah, with another webinar. And until then, bye-bye. Take care of yourself and good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Yeah,
night.
good night.
Good night.
Really, thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.